Hey, look at that.
Good evening, and welcome to Conservative News Network, CNN. Tonight, we will cover one of the biggest news stories of the past month, gun violence. Today, we will cover whether there's a relationship between video games and the subsequent gun violence.
Here at CNN, we strive to be the most impartial, nonpartisan, and overall unbiased news. What a promo.
Let's get right into it. First, we will start with an interview with a highly regarded psychologist,
Dr. Oliver Holland.
Let's see where he stands on this issue.
Here I'm greeted by Cambridge professor Oliver Holland.
Please, Anderson, just call me Professor Dr. Oliver Holland.
So, you have done some great research on the topic of neurological response to modern media.
Well, yes, while publishing my dissertation, my old colleague and I noticed a pattern, a moderately strong positive correlation between youth exposure to violent media and the degree to which said youth would partake in violent activity.
So, what you're saying is that children playing violent video games, similar to those becoming so popular nowadays, can be at risk of becoming violent offenders in the future?
Well, exactly. Just as my experiment at Stanford University showed, a simple chi-squared test uncovered a statistically significant result towards disproving a null hypothesis that there is no association between video games and violent actions.
Well, thank you for that insight. Now on a more serious note, I would like to ask some questions about the resolution on violent video games adopted by the American Psychological Association in 2015.
Okay, fire away.
First, can you explain how widespread video game use is among adolescents?
Video game use has become pervasive in a child's life. More than 90% of US children play some kind of video games, and when only considering adolescents aged 12 to 17, that figure rises to a whopping 97%.
That's an incredible figure. And how do you feel about some of the criticism of video games relating to the recent acts of violence?
Well, news commentators often turn to violent video game use as a potential casual contributor to these acts of mass homicide. The media point to perpetrators' gaming habits as either a reason that they've chosen to commit their crimes or as a method of training. This practice extends at least as far back as the Columbine massacre in 1999, and has more recently figured prominently in the investigation into reporting of the Aurora, Colorado theater shootings in 2012. Also in Sandy Hook and Washington Navy Yard massacre, this coverage has contributed to significant public discussion of the impacts of violent video game use.
Yes, this question has been in the media for quite a while now. Do you believe that violent video games have any correlation to violence in society?
Well, so for more than 2 decades, scientists have investigated the effects of violent video game use. Multiple meta-analyses of the results have been conducted. Qualitative reviews since the APA's 2005 resolution that have focused on the effects of violent video game use have found a direct association between violent video games and aggressive outcomes.
So what you were saying is that video games do in fact impact the behavior of adolescents.
Partially. But I want to make it clear that the studies have been conducted on this topic have used subjects of all ages, not just adolescents. Researchers have continued to find out that violent video game use is associated with decreases in socially desirable behavior, such as pro-social behavior, empathy, and moral engagement.
Very interesting. If you don't mind, could you summarize the findings and a subsequent resolution by the APA?
Of course, although the number of studies directly examining the association between the amount of violent video game use and the amount of change in adverse outcomes is still limited, existing research suggests that higher amounts of exposure are associated with higher levels of aggression and other adverse outcomes. However, within those studies, there's a convergence of research findings across multiple methods and multiple samples with multiple types of measurements demonstrating the association between violent video game use and both increases in aggressive behavior, aggressive affect, aggressive cognitions, and decreases in social behavior, empathy, and moral engagement.
Thank you, Doctor.
Wow, what an intriguing interview, Andrews.
Yep. It makes it pretty clear that people who are exposed to greater amounts of violence in media will suffer negative effects.
I mean, those figures from the study, they were quite astounding, right?
For sure. Now we have to take a quick break. A word from our sponsor.
Join the NRA today and protect the Second Amendment.
Welcome back to CNN News with your hosts Andrews Coopers and Napoleon.
Hold on a second. Donald Trump is speaking live.
Let's go live, I guess.
Video games cause massive problems in our country, especially the violent ones. We have massive problems with China and school shootings. Don't forget about China though. China, don't get me started on China. Anyway, the school shooting could be avoided if we didn't have shooter video games. I have the best people working on a cure for this epidemic.
Thanks, Trump. For many of us, Fortnite is 2 weeks, but for 12-year-old LeBron James, it's a life. His father, however, is concerned about the effects this could have on his child. We are joined by him live for a quick interview.
And we're live. Hello, Mr. James. I'm sorry about your son, but thanks for allowing us into your house.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's get right into it. Recently, you reached out to our organization for parents and citizens concerned about video games and adolescents.
Yes, I'm incredibly concerned about the violent video games that are played by millions of kids across the country.
Can you elaborate on this? Like, what concerns you about this topic?
Of course. So my son and his friends have dozens of violent video games and have played them daily. I'm scared that these games are glorifying gun violence. Whatever happened to family values?
Well, it's become a huge debate throughout the entire country, but like, where's your perspective on this, you know?
Yeah, so I strongly feel that these violent video games are propping up the gun culture. Kids are rewarded in the game for killing as many people as possible. That is sick. We, as a society, should be teaching our children healthy values that aren't overshadowed by the ones they learn while playing video games.
Well, I mean, you know, Ohio State University, it's a university in the state of Ohio. Well, they conducted a study recently. Have you read about it? It delves into this topic of video games and gun violence and whatnot.
Yes. I was just about to mention this. This study is incredibly significant. They gathered a group of kids aged 8 to 12 to understand the effects of exposure to gun violence in media on children's interest in real guns. The children were randomly selected to either watch a clip from a movie or video game containing guns or to watch a clip without guns. They were then placed in a room with toys and a disabled gun. The amount of time each kid held the gun and the amount of time they pulled the trigger was measured. Guess what the result was?
I'm going to take a wild guess and say the kids who played the video games used the guns longer or were more savage in their playstyle?
Yes, that's exactly right. Among the study participants who watched the violent clips, pulled the trigger 2.8 times on average, while the kids who watched the clips without guns only pulled the trigger 0.1 times on average. Additionally, the kids who watched the violent scene held the gun for 53.1 seconds on average, while the other kids only held it for 11.1 seconds on average. That's an outstanding result.
Yes, it is. One last question. How do you believe the government should control these potential video games and like the violent offenders that they could create?
I think the government should make retail stores require identification when buying violent video games. Additionally, I think the government should make a registry of all violent video game purchases. They should record who bought them and which games they bought.
Yeah, I mean, that could be true, but I come from a more economic background, so how would that affect the gaming industry, and potentially could that be a scapegoat for larger issues?
I think this is the issue. I hate when everyone tries to blame the gun, when in reality it is the video games. The data shows that, and honestly, if the game industry struggles as a result, so be it. We are protecting our children, restoring traditional family values.
Very well, I agree with this. Guns don't kill people, video games do.
What a great dad.
Really, he is. And that'll be it for today.
In summary, violent video games have negatively impacted our society. These games have many effects on the mental health of our youth and directly help prop up gun culture.
Thanks for watching. Join us tomorrow night.
Good afternoon. Today on Liberal Leftist Channel, we have the hot topic of the year.
The weather?
No, the real juicy stuff. Gun violence. Do video games cause it? That's what we'll tell you today.
Various video games have become very popular, such as Fortnite, with millions playing them worldwide. They range from very violent to very tame, but most of them, very fun.
Some people say video games cause violence. Trump. However, we don't believe that, and we're going to tell you why. So first off, we have an interview with the Entertainment Software Association CEO, Patrick Vance.
Good afternoon, Patrick.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for coming out for this interview today.
No problem.
All right, so we're just going to ask you a couple questions, and you can go on with the rest of your day. All right. So what is the ESA?
Well, ESA stands for the Entertainment Software Association. We consist of many major video game companies, such as Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, Activision, and Entertainment Arts. Essentially, we are the ones who rate and make the games.
Okay. How do you guys rate your games?
Well, we use the ESRB ratings that stop kids from playing video games that are too violent for them without their parents' permission. The ratings are E for everyone, E 10 plus, everyone 10 and up, T for teen, M for mature, and AO for adults only, for the most pornographic content. The most popular game at the moment is Fortnite, which is rated T for teen, 13 plus.
All right. So do you think video games cause violence?
Well, games are played worldwide, and gun violence is really only common in the United States. They are disproportionately more common in the United States. In fact, when comparing the U.S. to the world, there have only been 5 school shootings since 2009 across the globe. In the United States, there's been 233. Though first-person shooter games like Call of Duty, Battlefield, and Halo are popular within American video game players, they're also popular all over the world. The game industry is a global market, with platforms like PlayStation 4 that serve territories with extremely restrictive gun laws and territories with relatively lax gun laws. Millions play games in the US alone, especially the violent ones. For example, Grand Theft Auto 5, a game in a series that is often brought up to illustrate how violent games are, has sold over 90 million copies worldwide. If even a small fraction of these people were driven to real-world violence and anger, we would see far more mass shootings than we do today.
Okay, so let's talk about policy. Some people think the process of acquiring games should be more rigorous. Do you agree?
Of course not. That would absolutely destroy the gaming industry. Millions are made from the gaming industry alone. The government collects taxes from these sales, and the restricted sale of video games will hurt the economy as a whole. Why don't we go after the root cause of the problem, the gun?
Thank you for your time, Patrick. We greatly appreciate your point of view.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you for that reporting, Harvey.
Yes, brilliant. Patrick really knows his stuff.
Yeah, so he pointed out that while video games are sold everywhere in the world, gun violence is significantly more present in the United States.
Exactly, and he said the ESA does their best to rate games according to their level of violence or inappropriate content.
Precisely. Now, a quick word from our sponsor. Don't change the channel.
I don't always drink coffee, but when I do, I drink Starbucks.
Welcome back. I could really use some coffee right now.
Breaking news. The Supreme Court has just announced that the ruling on the Brown versus ESA case has come out. This case will be highly influential in this debate.
Now to a reporter inside the courthouse.
No. I want a quarter every time anybody says that word.
Mr. Finch.
Hand it.
Mr. Finch.
Yeah, what?
Can I ask you some questions?
No, but I guess I'll listen. I have some work to get done.
Well, Rob, I want to know about the Entertainment Software Association versus Brown case. What are the facts?
Well, the state of California imposed some restrictions and labeling requirements on the sale of rental violent video games to minors. As you can imagine, the companies that create and distribute these violent video games brought a suit against the state.
Under what grounds did they bring about this suit?
They claim that the act violated their First and 14th Amendment rights, seeking to invalidate the law in California at federal district court.
And what did that court decide?
They ruled in favor of the plaintiffs and prevented the enforcement of this law.
But it didn't end there, right?
No. The state appealed it, and it made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was affirmed, a 7-2 vote. In the majority opinion, the court ruled, like the protected books, plays, and movies that preceded them, video games also communicate ideas and even social messages, and through many familiar literary devices, and through features distinctive to mediums such as a player's interaction with a virtual world, that suffices to have it fall under the First Amendment rights.
So there's no more policy?
Yeah, it was a sham. It was a violation of the First Amendment, you know? And the world is better now that it's gone. Don't hate on the game. Hate the player. What kind of line is that?
Incredible news.
Yeah, the law restricting purchases of video games to some in California has been struck down by the highest court in the land.
Yep. Well, that concludes today's broadcast. We hope you learned some valuable information.
Essentially, video games are sold worldwide, and the only country that seems to have a raging gun problem is the US. Secondly, the restriction of purchases of video games is a direct violation of the First and 14th Amendment. Finally, the regulation of the gaming industry would hinder the economy and millions of workers would be affected.
That's it for tonight. Tune in next time. Thank you.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.